This is the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandez, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show. Welcome to a new episode of the Christian Circle podcast. Today we have a new guest, Mr. Matthew McKenna, who's going to talk to us a little bit about tithing and almsgiving during the season of Lent. So, Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
So my name is Matthew McKenna. I'm a professor of theology. Right now, I'm working and studying at Ave Maria University in Florida, at the very south of Florida, nearby Naples, Florida. So my job is to study the Word of God deeply further, dedicate my life to studying it, and then share the fruits of that studies with others, mainly those who I'm blessed to have as students, but also other people through various forms of writing and speaking.
Good. So I actually saw some of your written work. You wrote an article, I think it was a while ago, but it was about the difference between tithing and almsgiving, and that's how I found you actually. So what does tithing mean, first of all, and how much are we expected to tithe?
Yeah, I think this is a really misunderstood idea. Tithing really hasn't been the practice of tithing hasn't been popular in the last, my whole lifetime, at least the last 50 or 60 years. I'm not that old, but at least that long it seems to me. What it is, tithing is a really ancient practice in the church. It goes all the way back to the Torah. There's instructions of it in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 14, Leviticus 27, and Numbers 18. So it's like fundamental to the Old Testament, the Jewish religion, and Christianity, once Christ came, of course, continued the practice exactly as it had been practiced, exactly how as the Jews have been practicing it for thousands of years at that point in time. So what it is, tithing, it kind of comes from the word tithe, basically means 1/10, and it's the practice of giving to God 1/10 of more or less your income, 1/10 of the fruits of your fields. In the Old Testament, it was mainly like actual produce, wheat, grain, wine, things like that. But what it is, tithing served a twofold purpose. First, it's an act of religion. It's an act of honoring God. It's a sacrifice to God, especially when you're literally giving grain and grapes, produce back to God. It's an act of worship of Him because you recognize that He's the one from whom these came. He's the one that gave you what you have. Even if you are the one working the fields or working your job for an income, all things come from Him. He's the creator of everything. All the good we have comes from Him. And this is exactly why we say grace too. We thank God because He's the one that gives us food. That's the whole idea of grace. And so tithing is an act of worship of God and recognition that He's the one that gives us the good things we have. So chiefly and firstly, it's an act of worship of God. And we see this in Leviticus 27. There Moses says, all the tithe of the land, so 1/10 the produce of the land, whether of the seed of the land or the fruit of the trees, is the Lord's, is holy to the Lord. So all these things are already His, and by our giving to Him, we're just recognizing that. So that's like the first purpose of tithing, is worship of God. And secondarily, we also see this in the Old Testament, especially in the way tithing was practiced, and also explicitly in the book of Numbers, where Moses says, to the Levites, I've given every tithe in Israel for an inheritance in return for their service, which they serve, their service in the tent of meeting. And this is the idea that, well, God's not like hanging around the corner for us to receive our tithes, to receive our grain. Like, you can't literally give your tithes to God. He's not around the corner hanging out. But His ministers are. Those who serve us spiritually, religiously, who lead us in worship, they actually are right around the corner. And so tithing, how we do is we actually give it to the pastors, to the priests, to the Levites. And this is our worship of God, but also it's just a way to provide for them. It's the way they can live and not starve to death. Because famously in the Old Testament, God did not give any land to the tribe of Levi, the Levites. They had no land. And this comes up in a bunch of the Psalms. And so how they lived, literally how they got food and clothing, was from the tithes of the people, from people giving them money. St. Paul brings this up in the New Testament all throughout, but especially in 1 Corinthians 9. He says, if we have sown spiritual good among you, is it too much if we reap your material benefits? Others share this rightful claim upon you. do not we still more? It's like if some people are going to dedicate their life, their for their work, they're going to serve us religiously by teaching, leading us in worship, preaching. Well, then we should pay them back for that work for us.
Mhm.
The ones who teach us and preach to us and offer sacrifice for us, they're helping us, doing a good for us, and dedicating their lives to that for us. It's a service, so to speak, that they pay to us. So we should pay them for that service. So tithes also has the added benefits of allowing our priests and pastors to live and not starve to death.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a good point. You brought up the New Testament as well. And I know that during the early church, they weren't even having this concept of how much. They were just, I think, donating everything communally
Yeah,
and then, having people support it. So every member of the church was actually supported through that communal offering, right?
yeah, exactly. In the Acts of the Apostles, we see that early in the Acts, they brought everything to Peter. And
Yeah.
when there's that one couple in the first couple of chapters of Acts that holds back some of the profits
Mm,
from their sale.
yeah.
And then both the husband and the wife fall dead at Peter's feet because
Yeah.
they deceive Peter, saying, "Oh yes, this was everything," but actually it wasn't all the profits. And
Yeah.
Peter's like, "Are you lying?" And they're like, "No." And then each one of them falls dead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so when people are often asking like what exactly is the church using these funds for, there are so many ministries that are being supported that you probably may not be aware, but
yeah,
then we have all these things that are happening and they need financial support.
yeah. That ranges everywhere from the priest needs to be able to buy bread and wine for mass. The pastor needs a place to sleep and has to pay rent or mortgage, and he needs
Uh,
something to eat for himself.
yeah.
From simple basic things like that to if you want to have a homeless shelter, a shelter for abused people, who you want to feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty.
Hmm.
If the church is going to do that, the church has to have money.
Yeah.
But also things like if you want to have ministers being trained, seminarians being trained to be
Mm.
priests,
Yes.
that costs money. That's education. That costs money.
Yeah. So on the flip side, since it's Lent, how is almsgiving different, and how much is expected when it comes to almsgiving?
Yeah. Almsgiving, I think most people confuse these two practices or
Yeah.
more equate them as if they were the same.
Yeah.
Part of that, I think, is the motivation is people see corrupt leaders in the church and so don't want to give to the church. And so they think, oh, I'll just give to alms. I'll give alms. I'll give to the poor instead and
Yeah.
think these are the same. Yeah, but these are different. So tithing, what we just talked about is it's an act of religion. It's justice to God to honor him for giving us everything. And then it's also justice to our ministers, to our priests and pastors who spiritually lead and guide and nourish us. Almsgiving is justice to the poor.
Mm.
Everybody has a right to the basic necessities of life, things they need to live to survive, not just barely scrape by with a crust of bread a day, but like live a decent, dignified human life.
Mhm.
And if people aren't being given that, or if they're not being given the opportunity, the chance to work for their daily wage, like let's say Paul also says, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. So if they're not going to give them the chance to work, or they're being paid unjustly low wages, or taxed too oppressively, or something like that, if they're poor and in need, they have a right to our excess.
Mm.
This is a classic teaching of the Catholic Church. The fathers of the church, the early bishops and leaders of the church, all of them basically unanimously had very, very harsh things to say about this. They would say all the time, like, you are not being kind to the poor man, to the beggar, when you give him from your excess wealth. You
Mm.
are giving him what belongs to him. So,
Mm.
like, our surplus wealth actually belongs to the poor by right. It's
Mm.
not ours. We don't own it. Actually, the poor own it. The ones who genuinely need it, they're the ones that own our excess wealth that like we don't actually need. So we're just giving it back to them what's already theirs. Now, of course, this is totally contradictory to a modern American view of property and things
Yeah.
like that. Uh, but it just comes from Christians have always taken this from first chapter of Genesis,
Mm.
where God gave the goods of the earth to Adam and Eve for their sustenance. So
Mm.
everything, the goods of the earth, the products, things we can produce and use that we need, belong to everybody because everybody needs them. So almsgiving then is justice to the poor. And of course, this also is like pleasing to God because God is like Christ tells us to do this. Matthew chapter 6. When you give alms, Don't let your right hand know what your left is doing. So like it's also God commands us to do this, so it's justice to God. But in itself, almsgiving is act of justice to the poor. It's not even like charity or kindness or generosity to the poor. It's justice to the poor. And so tithing, like the very name tithe, 1/10, kind of comes with a prescribed amount built into it is the idea. You should give like 1/10 of your income. Almsgiving is much more variable. It's really how much can you give. Like if you are one of the poor, one of the starving who receives alms, you're not like of course expected to give alms if you're the one receiving them. If you are the poor, but if you have surplus wealth, which let's just be honest, almost every single one of us in America has surplus wealth. Not of course not everybody, but most of us do. Very few of us, very few of us are receiving alms. Well, then we have to give a lot more. And of course, those with more resources, with more excess surplus wealth, would have an obligation to give more as well.
And what role does prayer have in this? Like when you decide, okay, where am I going to give? How much am I going to give? To whom am I going to give? Have you used this in, have you prayed about it, or what kind of prayer time or meditation have you used while deciding these things?
Yeah, that's really good. I think St. Paul gives us some good instructions here. Like St. Paul's justification for for requesting tithes is, "I've done spiritual good among you, so you should give me money." And that idea is we should actually be tithing to the church that we actually go
Okay.
to the church that actually feed that we participate in
Yeah.
that feeds us spiritually.
Mm.
Um, Almsgiving is a little more different. In a way, almsgiving is who's the poor one around you.
Mm.
uh those just close, like in one sense you should give to the poor person in your own town more than the poor person to the next state, just because they're closer to you.
Mhm.
You can have more of a relationship with them. So there's that. But there's also, well, who needs it more?
Mm.
You should give to the poorer person more than to the less poor person. The
Mhm.
person who gets the person who needs it more.
Mm.
And almsgiving takes on a lot of different forms these days. The tradition of Christians have always recognized that almsgiving can take many forms. It's not just give money to beggar.
Mhm.
It That's like almost like the prototype, but it actually includes all 7 corporeal works of mercy and all 7
Mhm.
spiritual works of mercy that we find listed in the Bible. So feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, visit the sick. Like it doesn't have to be here's money. It can be here's a sandwich or
Mm.
here's a home. So it takes all these different forms. And nowadays the issue, the worry, the fear so many people have with almsgiving is, well, if I give money to the baker on the street, he might just use it to buy drugs. And
Yeah.
then I'm like fueling his drug addiction. I don't want to do that. And I've had so many priests and religious leaders tell me things like that. And that's probably true because tithing, the purpose is chiefly honor to God,
Mm.
worship of God. But in almsgiving, I'm actually trying to help the person. The
Mm.
person is in need. So you want to meet and fix their needs. And so in almsgiving, we absolutely should be considering where the alms will be
Mm.
effective, where they'll be effective, where they will do good, where they will help people. So especially, it seems like we can give to charitable organizations. We might think of nonprofits,
Mm.
501(c)s, organizations that help the poor and needy.
Mm.
And then you probably want to see, well, which ones help the poor and needy better, more effectively, and
Mm.
which ones do it, and give to those ones more, so to speak. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So during this time of almsgiving, there's also a lot of calls. The diocese is calling for the annual Catholic appeal.
Yeah.
There's multiple things going on. Things have become expensive, so there are a lot of people who they can give, but then giving that much itself cuts things too close for their budgets too. They're
Yeah.
struggling financially. They're in difficult circumstances. They're trying to save more. So what rules or what about these people?
The rule I try to follow for myself is, especially when like the church there's your annual appeal or your Lenten appeal. I desperately try to give something, and
Mm.
that can be literally like $2.
Yeah.
But all that means is, okay, I'm not going to buy that coffee today. I'm going to make coffee at home today instead of buying it at the Dunkin' or Starbucks. I save $1 or $2 or $3. Okay, I'll give that money. So like giving something rather than nothing is so much better. Partially because it trains us to be less detached and to be more trusting in God, and it's the act of doing some good is always better than the failure to do any good at all. Yeah, so my own like goal is whenever like the church asks for money, whether it's not like, oh, the air conditioning in the rectory broke and now the priest is baking, and we're in Florida. That'd be really bad if the air conditioning broke. That'd be really bad for us. Like, okay, if I had like desperately tight this month, it's like I'm a graduate student still finishing my PhD. I'm very poor by definition. Like desperately try to give something, whether or not that's only $1 or $2 or like some spare change from like my pocket or something. But desperately try to give something, and more when I can, more whenever you can.
And I think it's a good, Jesus himself has given us a good example, the lady who gives her very little, like even her small amount, he values that so much more than somebody who just gives out of their generosity,
Yeah,
something fringe, right?
yeah. The widow's mite. I think this is
Yeah,
Mark 12 maybe.
yeah,
And also maybe in Luke 2. But yeah, like she gives 2 pennies. That's it. Like financially, utterly meaningless. This is not going to
yeah,
buy anything. But spiritually, tremendously good for her. And also, Christ, of course, points out that it's her last 2 pennies.
yeah, yeah,
That might be hard for us to do,
yeah,
to actually give our actual last 2 pennies. I'm not sure how many of us could actually do that. Oh, that just speaks to our weakness, not
yeah.
Christ's foolishness.
Yeah. And also it's the act of ultimate trust, right? That
Yep.
I trust you, Lord. I give you all of this, that you will take care of me. And we have
Yeah.
doubts about that.
Yeah. Another like a synonym for tithes, especially in the Old Testament, was first fruits, because the first of your harvest you're going to give. And if you think about it, if you're living off the land, a farmer, in ancient Israel, by the time the harvest is coming around and you're gathering in the first fruits, the first of the harvest, you're probably running pretty low on stores.
Yeah.
And what you have is probably pretty dingy and not very appetizing.
Yeah.
And now but then you're harvesting these juicy fruits and vegetables that look delicious, and that's the one you have to go offer. Yeah, so tithing has always been an act of trust in God, and by doing these acts of trust in God, of course, that increases, that
Mm.
grows our trust in God.
Yeah. Yeah. So, since you already mentioned fruits, like from your own personal experience, what have been the fruits of almsgiving and tithing? How has this affected you spiritually?
I think like learning to trust in God, not in myself,
Mm.
especially as like Americans, you're very financially oriented and trying to plan for our futures and have control and have all the various investment accounts and savings
Mhm.
accounts set up and have all the insurance, all different thousand types of insurances covered, and just be so financial security is an obsession of America.
Yeah.
And tithing is quite an act quite against that. You're just going to take a significant part of your money and in a financial in terms, throw it away.
Yeah.
And in almsgiving too, throw it away. Uh, and especially when you're poor and struggling and trying to desperately trying to save a little more. Um, that's when, of course, it's all the harder. So I think tithing and almsgiving too, especially if you're poor and you don't have a lot of alms and you actually are kind of struggling yourself to give alms then to someone who's even more struggling, that it really is an act of trust in God that he will provide. And of course, Christ says he'll provide. If the birds don't have storehouses, but they're always fed. The
Mm.
flowers don't sow, but like they're clothed beautifully. You're going to be fine.
Mm.
That's Matthew 7, I think.
Mm.
Five. It's in Sermon on the Mount, so Matthew 5, 6, or 7. So like Christ will provide for us, but it's really, really hard for us to trust him. And tithing is that act of trust in him. And this is kind of the root of all sin is pride, is looking for
Mm.
trusting in ourselves and trying to be the ones who take care of ourselves. So growing in trust in God and trusting in yourself less is just radically essential to the spiritual life, to union with Christ.
Mm.
Because ultimately, what Christ came to save us from wasn't poverty, but sin and death.
Mm.
in one sense, some of us actually can overcome poverty on our own. Like some people get rich, some evil, wicked people get rich.
Mm.
But none of us, absolutely none of us, can overcome sin and death on our own. Only by
Yeah.
Christ can we do that. So the radical dependence on Christ is just necessary, especially if you're called to like the full depths of holiness and martyrdom, like so many of the saints and holy people throughout the church history and even the Old Testament are. It's a just radically trusting Christ and not all in yourself.
Mm.
And that's tithing and almsgiving improve that. They strengthen your trust in God and your weaken your self-reliance, your reliance on yourself. I think that's been at least my personal the
Yeah.
main fruit of the main personal spiritual growth I've seen from these practices in myself, at least.
Any last words of advice that you have for anybody going through the Lenten season right now and considering almsgiving, or even considering tithing for the first time, since it's not a very common concept in the Catholic Church?
Yeah,
Um, any last bits of advice?
I would just greatly advise to do it. But yeah, even if it's extremely small, just try it, do it,
Mm.
commit. In some ways, it's really easy. Like almost all the churches, every parish has like an online system. You, so you can set
Yeah.
up your bank account, so $10 goes in every month, and then when you then increase that to $20 a month at some point, and eventually like significantly more, hopefully. But so it's really easy to do. Actually, you don't have to think, oh, I have to pull out cash, like put in the baskets. But also, if you have kids, it might be really good to do that so they can see you doing it and learn this is what we do. This is an appropriate thing to do. So you can model that for your children.
Yeah.
But the main thing is do it. Try it just a little bit. For almsgiving, like don't necessarily go give a bigger 20, but give to some nonprofit that helps
Yeah.
do that does homeless ministry actually. Even if it's just $20 or $5 or $1. Just do it a little bit.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. And just to remind people, I mean, the Lord does promise that if you give, He is willing to give you back, pressed down, shaken, well,
Yeah.
we're running over, and your cup will run over at some point. But I think it's an act of surrender that we still don't, or we cannot somehow try to do.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Exactly right.
All right. So, if people want to find your writing anywhere online, where can they find you or write to you, Matthew?
You most of my writing is going to be right now on the Catholic online journal, Catholic Exchange. Right there, I also write sometimes for Catholic 365. So if you search my name in either website, you'll probably find an author page. And that's most of what I'm doing right now.
Okay, all right. So thank you so much for joining us in this podcast, and I wish you and your ministry all the very best.
Thank you for having me on.